Chapter 7. Something Bizarre. A successful beginning of work on oneself requires the happy occurrence of an equal development of personality and essence. Fragments, page 164. Based on Gurdjieff's above remark, equal development of personality and essence can be taken as a cardinal rule of the fourth way, one for which there are no exceptions. Another kind of balance is also required, one that goes hand in hand with developmental balance, that is, balance in the level of activation of those two major components. By performing certain precisely choreographed movements first on one side of the body, then on the other side, we'll be stimulating and activating first the one, and then the other of the two breasts of a virgin, and their component parts which, with their parts, are called totalities of functioning. After activating first the one and then the other, we perform the same movements on both sides of the body simultaneously, joining and activating those two totalities in precisely coordinated, harmonious movements. More complex moves will then follow. With enough repetitions performed over a long enough time, the required balance in activation of our two selves will be achieved and temporarily set. That balance can be more or less set for life. It can become almost permanent, but only after many years of work. While balance in activation of those two totalities is required, before that balance can be achieved, we must first have balance in development. Without developmental balance, any attempt at equal activation will fail, and the results of the exercise will be lopsided. Gurdjieff often used the horse and carriage analogy. We will use a smaller version to demonstrate the need for developmental balance. We will use a small cart or wagon pulled by a dog and a cat, the one on the right, the other on the left. We will of course need a normal-sized dog and a larger than usual cat. But if we get the sizes right and get the harnesses and straps right, we will have the two pulling together in balanced fashion. But we cannot hitch a normal-sized grown dog and a kitten to the wagon and expect to get good results, as many have been trying to do for years. We must first help our kitten grow up, and then train it to the reins before our wagon will be drawn anywhere but in circles. Equal development of our dog and cat is simply required. We will cover Gurdjieff's method for achieving developmental balance just below. Despite emphasis on the physical movements of the exercise, what Gurdjieff is describing is not only a way to activate our left and right major components, it is for the development of Guiide body. As any growing body needs nourishment, we will have to supply our growing Guiide body with additional food. Since the food of Guiide is in the air we breathe, the exercise will require many repetitions of the mentioned precise body movements in conjunction with an unusual breathing technique that delivers more air than is normally needed. Life is Real, page 84. That increased air intake must be done safely, consciously and deliberately. The two physical elements of the practice, movements and the breath, combined with self-remembering, constitute a highly effective method of building Guiide and, with a couple of Gurdjieff's special ingredients added, even higher bodies. Combining performance of the chief exercise with continued study of Gurdjieff's writings will meet the criteria for keeping Guiide to completion. Having completed the seventh scale step, C, in development of Guiide brings us to, or even completes the first scale step Do of a new octave, which is the octave of soul. In other words, the 7 scale steps of Guide's development may be seen as 7 internal octaves of the first scale step of the soul. Be that as it may, in order to get this program underway, we must be fully prepared, which means we must first of all, without fail, find a remedy for our imbalance in development. Developmental balance. Few have been blessed with the happy occurrence of an equal development of personality and essence. Since our education neglected subjects like music, art and other areas in which essence excels, the result is usually a better developed personality at the expense of an undeveloped essence. Thus, and through no fault of our own, we have become lopsided. Since our education did not take that balance into account, you will have to create that balance for yourself now. This developmental balance program is a part of your essential preparations for the following reasons. In order to understand Gurdjieff's meanings, we must grasp his use of allegory and picture form language. If you had followed his example and studied as he did at the medical library at Kars, you should know that personality has no real skill with allegory or with imagery, facial and pattern recognition and such, while essence is strong in those areas. And so, if we read Gurdjieff's picture form stories while our centre of gravity is in personality, as it usually is, especially when reading, we are certain to miss his meaning. To get at his true meaning, we must bring essence into balance with personality, so that essence is able to participate in our fully conscious study of Gurdjieff's teaching stories. Bringing essence into developmental balance with personality is the result of hands-on experience with such activities as the mentioned handicrafts, arts and domestic sciences, the learning of which normally takes a good amount of time, and for the lack of which there are no quick fixes. Gurdjieff, however, has distilled that learning to its purest essence, so that while it may take a bit of time, it will not take a decade or more, as is usually the case. Still, as Gurdjieff says, for successful work, developmental balance is required. This requirement allows for no substitutes or alibis. While such balance is not easy to come by and is possible for only a few, I not only suspect but know without any doubt whatsoever that it is possible for each and every one of these unfortunates. And while the cure for our lopsidedness will require steady effort, it will also be fun, just as when we were children and enjoyed banging on the piano, singing and laughing and making a grand mess with watercolours and clay. Your balance adjustment program can be quite pleasant. Gurdjieff's remedy. In this matter of developmental balance, Gurdjieff found making music to be the most useful and practical method. You will find his emphasis on music and music making in Beelzebub's Tales, Meetings with Remarkable Men, Life is Real, Herald of Coming Good, Fragments of an Unknown Teaching, Teachings of Gurdjieff, Journey Through This World, Our Life with Mr. Gurdjieff, as well as in numerous other books. So great was his emphasis on music. In particular, he often played music of his own creation after talks and meetings with various groups. In all of the above-mentioned books, Gurdjieff's advice is carried by his favourite technique, demonstration, but in an addendum is herald, which most of the more normal free-brain beings think quite inscrutable if not bizarre. He almost tells us, he instructs that making music will be part of our training. In his description of the new study house, he first subsumes his work in terms of the 3 series, but in reverse order. He then gives instruction on what is to be used there, while the how is given elsewhere. The following is from a supplementary announcement found at the end of Herald. Here he is describing a new construct. The new gymnasium or study house will comprise, besides the theatre and lecture hall, which already existed. Working from back to front, he speaks of the lecture hall, a place where lectures, words, are the means of teaching, which is of course the first series. Then he mentions the theatre, a place where we are taught by metaphor and allegory in the plays staged by his stories, which is the second series. And finally he mentions the new study house, which is the 3rd series, where his real instruction is found in a combination of methods, especially in the imagery of picture form language. By also calling it the new gymnasium, he clearly implies that a physical exercise will be part of the programme. A bizarre message. Then, in further description of the new study house, and in a very strange way, he gives the first part of his instruction on this essential preparation. This building will be fitted out also with other inventions, which I long ago constructed, and which are already known to many, though they have not been as yet exploited, and among which are to be found the luminous keyboard and the retro-rebounding echo-raising organ. Taken literally, that excerpt seems to be science fiction, and in the past I've wasted considerable time puzzling over what Gurdjieff could mean by those two strange instruments. However, as I learned more of the techniques Gurdjieff uses to conceal his message, and began to notice his habit of placing meaningless distractions in a prominent foreground, while the real message is put in simple terms in the background, and then thought to apply that learning to this strange passage, the above nonsense finally began to make sense, and a very simple sense it is. If one's mental acuity is sufficiently developed to allow one to see as if through Beelzebub's Tescuanu, and look past the superfluous parts of his message, and even see that the bizarre elements are nothing more than ingeniously effective cover, similar to elaborate clothing covering a rather plain man or woman. Or, if one can by what I call the line-through, or some other method, strip those two things down until they stand utterly naked and blushing before you, although perhaps it is you who will be blushing when you realise that nothing could be plainer than the luminous keyboard and the retro-rebounding echo-raising organ. Plainer, that is, in terms of what those two overly adorned and astoundingly rare instruments, in the eyes of one who is not so easily impressed or distracted by trivia, bourbons, and other shiny trinkets, share, or have in common. Perhaps what he is really talking about in his circuitous elaboration is an uncommon musical device of the type represented by both of those gloriously described instruments, as well as by the instrument on which he, it is rumoured, sometimes played, which instrument is rumoured to have been mentioned by name somewhere in one of Patriarch Knott's 2 books, most likely Journey. As with so much else, perhaps those 2 instruments are just examples, and actually represent a type of instrument recommended as part of your new study house, and is, as some say, and with which I do not entirely disagree, not intended to be used in the usual way, but in a very special and unique way that will stimulate certain little grey cells residing in a particular place in our first totality of functioning. And true enough, these instruments, which are already known to many, by Gurdjieff's almost countless demonstrations, along with those little grey cells, have not been as yet exploited. Perhaps a few of the more disturbed among us will do so now. But how? Well, you already have everything needed to determine the kind of instrument to use. All that is left is to find precisely what you are to do with it. While the type of instrument to be used is given in Herald, the process by which that instrument is to be exploited is given elsewhere. In all of the coverage of music in the above-mentioned books, there is one especially instructive passage found, if you look very closely and extrapolate from what is said to yourself. On page 127 of Life is Real. That evening, after the demonstration of the music usually composed the day before, and after the performance, according to the established custom, by my Secretary of Music, and at the choice and wish of the majority present, of 2 pieces of the former series of my music. Take another look at that passage, keeping in mind that he uses both high profile and low profile for his purposes, and that he seldom speaks literally. Who or what do you think he means by my Secretary of Music? And why did he not simply give that person a name, if in fact it is a person? After all, in that book he is not timid about naming others. He names 3 persons, 2 of whom played a significant role in this trip to America, indicating the role they played then, as well as the role he intended for them upon his next visit. He names his physician, Dr. Stroojnabal, originally intended to be his representative in America. He then names Araj as intended translator for Dr. Stroojnabal. As Gurdjieff clearly states, Araj, since he was a beginner in Gurdjieff's work, was initially left behind in America not to teach, but merely to run errands related to Gurdjieff's next visit. Mr. Araj, who was left by me in America, and who was occupied at first only by fulfilling my errands regarding my projected second visit. Life is Real second talk. The third person, his translator, M. Farapontov, is mentioned, but to no purpose that I can see, except perhaps simply to demonstrate that he is in fact naming names. While he puts names to each of those three, in the case of his Secretary of Music no name is given. When Gurdjieff does something unusual or refrains from doing the usual, there is a purpose. In this case by naming 1 his interpreter, by naming 2 his future assistant in America, and naming 3 his assistants, but 4 not naming his Secretary of Music, he's bringing our attention to that act of omission, the missing name. Why? Initially I found his lack of giving this fourth person a name odd, but along with everyone else I just assumed that obviously he meant Thomas de Hartmann. Only later did I realise that perhaps Gurdjieff anticipated and encouraged that assumption and used our assumption as a by the reader supplied cover for what he's really saying. What if, instead of a person, this Secretary of Music is a persona, a cover for a flesh and blood totality of functioning, specifically our first totality of functioning? If in Life is Real, Gurdjieff is not just wasting his and our time by giving useless trivia on his trip to America, then it is a very personal something found in the persons of both Gurdjieff, as shown by my Secretary of Music, as well as in each of his target audience, these unfortunates. Given that you understand the identity and proclivities of your Secretary of Music, for which you will need the recommended by example study of neuropsychology, and taken in conjunction with his remarks on the new study house, his meaning becomes clear. Learn from my example and exploit the inventions found in the new study house in the manner demonstrated. Re-education. As said, in our so-called education, everything is skewed towards personality, towards verbal learning, while the needs and interests of essence are almost entirely ignored. That must be corrected, and that is what Gurdjieff's strangely equipped new study house is all about. If you are one of these unfortunates, then you have probably, due to an inborn affinity, already had some experience in the arts. You may have tried painting or drawing, guitar or piano, or something similar for a time, but a fleeting or mild experience is not enough. Even if you have become a professional artist or musician, that is not enough. Merely drawing things or playing someone else's music will not do the job. Our exploitation of the instrument must be focused on a particular task. We must educate essence in a specific skill. It has to do with creating something original in a non-verbal realm, an area best covered by the abilities of essence. It is not of the slightest importance that you become an accomplished musician. It is important only to give essence the required training in the exercise of judgment as required in the activity described by Gurdjieff. The benefit lies in the many small decisions your essence will be forced to make in following Gurdjieff's example. As you may recall, I earlier advised noting and remembering that essence is untrained in reason. Gurdjieff's Rebalance program provides that training by way of the type of instrument found in the new study house, in conjunction with your personal Secretary of Music, following the example implied in his remark. That evening, after the demonstration of the music usually composed the day before. This program is Gurdjieff's remedy for our developmental imbalance, and I know of no other. If you take his remark at the beginning of this chapter seriously, you will realize achieving developmental balance is no mere suggestion. It is not an option. For successful work on yourself, it is simply required. Given the necessity of a good balance between our first two totalities of functioning, this bizarre advice is among the most important of Gurdjieff's teachings. Because no matter how intelligent you are, no matter how much knowledge you may have acquired, until your kitten is brought into approximate equal development with your dog, you will get nowhere. Successful work requires the first two totalities working in harmony and with equal development in order to create and strengthen the third totality. It is law, the law of three. Given that reality, the re-education of essence, is a prerequisite for the chief exercise to produce results. For the exercise to be productive, you must first do the work on developmental rebalancing indicated by Gurdjieff. The requirements of balance cannot be obtained by more study of this or any other book, or by the mind or the intellect, but only by the work-out given essence with the bizarre instrument described in Herald, by the activity described in Life is Real. For the vast majority of these unfortunates, the required balance will be gained only by following Gurdjieff's sage advice. If you wish to eventually have a completed Kejjan, give this work the highest priority even before you find and begin the chief exercise, starting, for instance, now. As with the inner skill of self-awareness, this rebalancing of our first two totalities will take long and steady practice. And you should know that although your lopsidedness is not your fault, the cure is your responsibility. No one else can do that for you. It is time, or past time, to get started with this program. It is real work, but it is pleasant work that is simple and will not require much effort. Just read and study as advised by Gurdjieff, and spend 20 minutes or so following Gurdjieff's advice, exploiting the instrument described in Herald in the manner described in Life is Real. And, as demonstrated by Gurdjieff, keep your music simple. Focus on the melody. You will not need an expensive or new instrument. Any inexpensive version of the right kind of instrument in working order will do. And if you can avoid being hypercritical of yourself, you will enjoy the experience and you will benefit, both, or even all three of you. Gurdjieff sets the example. He gives the instruction. The rest is up to you. You should pause your reading at the end of this chapter lest you bury Gurdjieff's good advice under more words and ideas. Becoming distracted, you must never return to this essential corrective. So when you finish this chapter, stop reading. If you have an instrument that fits the description, go ahead and get started. Otherwise, take the time to go out and beg, borrow, or buy one. Never mind guitar or any other instrument, or any of the other arts in which you may have developed an interest or skill. Although you will have surely benefited from such interest, they now carry far too much associative baggage. This developmental balance program comes from Gurdjieff, and he advises, specifically, that we exploit the uncommon type of instrument described in Herald. In the manner demonstrated in Life is Real, do not make the mistake of thinking you know better than Gurdjieff or could modify his advice. Just follow his advice and use a luminous or retro-rebounding echo-raising thing. This developmental balance program will be useful for anyone, but it is essential for these unfortunates and is certainly more important than reading more of this book at this time. So my advice is that at the end of this chapter you close this book and begin, or acquire an instrument and then begin your rebalancing program. You can always come back to my bizarre writings later. Confidentiality. By the way, if someone asks your opinion on what kind of instrument or exploitation Gurdjieff means, as you should with everything from Gurdjieff's third series, just plead ignorance. Just tell him that you do not know what to think, and ask what he thinks instead. That should become your practice with everyone, friend or foe, because each must reach his own conclusions, and the swapping of opinions is not only of no use, but an impediment. Another good reason is that Gurdjieff strongly suggests that secrets of the fourth way be kept. His books carry dozens of examples, suggestions on the need for secrecy and confidentiality, and you have probably read enough of them to already intuitively understand the message. I will, however, in case your memory could use a friendly jog, give a short quotation from two of those suggestions, one from Beelzebub and one from Meetings. The first is from Beelzebub's Tales, page 901. In this excerpt, Beelzebub has just astonished his new friend, Haji Dhruv, by not responding as expected to Truv's attempt to raise a boil on his leg by way of certain creative vibrations. Beelzebub wished to explain the reason Truv's experiment failed, but under the circumstances he could not, because another, a less developed friend of his was present. I had full moral right to tell him the truth about myself, because by his attainments he was already Kauman Ura, that is, a free-brain being of that planet with whom it is not forbidden us from above to be frank. But at that moment I could in no way do this, because there was also present there the dervish Haji Boga Eddin, who was still an ordinary terrestrial free-brain being, concerning whom, already long before, it was forbidden under oath from above to the beings of our tribe to communicate true information to any one of them on any occasion whatsoever. This interdiction upon the beings of our tribe was made, it seems, on the initiative of the very saintly Ashiata Shemash. This interdiction on the beings of our tribe was made chiefly because it is necessary for the free-brain beings of your planet to have knowledge of being. And any information, even if true, gives to beings in general only mental knowledge, and this mental knowledge, as I have already once told you, always serves beings only as a means to diminish their possibilities of acquiring this knowledge of being. And since the sole means left to these unfortunate free-brain beings of your planet for their complete liberation from the consequences of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer are just this knowledge of being, therefore this command was given to the beings of our tribe under oath concerning the beings of the earth. The worst thing you could do to a friend is to just tell him or explain one of Gurdjieff's secret teachings. That would cut short his struggle to understand and remove the benefit of struggle, leaving him with your opinion, just verbal head stuff, and little else. With a friend, all you can do is point him to a relevant chapter or section, talk around it, give hints, and offer your moral support. This second excerpt comes from Meetings, page 165, where Gurdjieff is speaking of his group's explorations of the Gobi Desert. What we chiefly heard in these conversations was that, under the sands of the present-day desert, villages and even entire cities lay buried, and that these sands also covered many treasures and other riches of the ancient peoples who had inhabited this once flourishing region. It was said that information about the location of these riches were known to certain men living in the neighbouring villages and was handed down from father to son under vows of secrecy. The violation of these vows, as many had already learned, entailed a punishment whose severity depended upon the importance of the secret betrayed. The ancient secrets that lay buried beneath the mounds of Gurdjieff's words may be treated with confidentiality, not only for the reasons already given, but also in order to protect Gurdjieff's teaching and avoid interfering with his and the Fourth Way's very big plan. As to what punishment awaits one who betrays Gurdjieff's secrets, in my opinion the worst punishment would be nothing, by which I mean the beings of the Fourth Way would simply turn their backs to the offender. Although most will probably not understand how that could be the worst punishment, I expect these unfortunates will better grasp the implications of closing that door on themselves. So when someone asks such questions, just play dumb or play average. Pretend to be like any other free-brain being. With all of the experience you have in pretending to that, it shouldn't be too difficult to manage a, "Gee, I don't know, what do you think?" Now, one more thing. What about me? What about the things I share with you in this book? Well, I hope I do not say too much. It is a fine line I try to walk, saying just enough in just the right way so that to the average free-brain being I appear to be a nut job on a long leash from a local asylum or another New Age wannabe guru spouting the usual nonsense. And yet, and at the same time, give enough so that these unfortunates can benefit. One thing I am counting on is the great difference between the level of comprehension available to normal free-brain beings and that available to those with Guiide body. Without Guiide body, normals are, as it were, playing cards with half the deck. Although the purely mental or intellectual abilities of normals when compared to these unfortunates may be the same, or even superior, normals will not have benefit of even a small part of Guide's higher reason. They will not have Guide's intuitive voice, and so will easily become lost in a maze of what I say, their load of previously acquired murd, and their own incessant circular mental chatter. While they turn in circles, you, as one of these unfortunates, may gain something of value from a passage where they get nothing, but a poor opinion of this writer. I am counting on your Guiide body, hopefully already developed of the scale step Re or Mi, to make the difference. 20 minutes. Now this is a good place. It is exactly the right place to take a break from this book and all other books and get started with your rebalancing program. The next chapter can wait. In fact, the next chapter should be avoided like poison ivy until you have begun your bizarre practice. Just pause for 20 minutes or so and put Gurdjieff's sage advice into practice. It is important to focus on this program now, and equally important to avoid cluttering your mind by reading new pages and chapters at this time. So review Gurdjieff's remarks in the excerpt at the beginning of this chapter, read it and believe it. Make starting this program your current single-minded point of focus, because without this practice and the developmental balance it brings, all of your efforts, all of your previous study, and all of your sincere hopes for the future will amount to nothing. Successful work requires equal development. If you understand the instrument and the way it is to be used, then get started. If you do not yet understand, then go over this chapter again from the beginning and continue until you do understand. If you must spend 3 days on this, then take 3 days. But wherever you do, and regardless of how long it takes, do not let Gurdjieff's passages on the new study house pass you by without taking from it his rebalancing program. At this time, nothing is more important than this rebalancing practice of yours. It is a prerequisite for the chief exercise, so give it your undivided attention until you understand Gurdjieff's instructions. And then, once understood, just relax and enjoy your first session with that strange instrument by trying something new, something that you have either never done before or only dabbled in. This new activity is essential, and fortunately for you, you'll find it to be interesting and pleasant. So close this book, go to your instrument, get started, and enjoy.